The air in Savannah, Georgia, was thick enough to drink, a humid cocktail of sweet tea, salt marsh, and impending rain. Inside the meticulously restored Victorian on Jones Street, however, the atmosphere was one of climate-controlled perfection. This house was Isaac Turner's fortress, his testament. In a world that often saw a black man in the construction business as a subcontractor, not a CEO, this three-story monument with its ornate gingerbread trim and manicured garden was his unassailable proof of success. Every polished floorboard, every gleaming window screamed, "I made it. We made it." Isaac watched his wife, Blair, move through their sun-drenched kitchen. She was arranging a bouquet of magnolias, her slender fingers handling the waxy petals with the same delicate precision she applied to a client's hair at her celebrated downtown salon. Blair was his greatest achievement, more so than any building he'd ever raised. She was grace personified, a walking piece of art with skin the color of warm honey and eyes that held the wisdom of old souls. Her success as the most sought-after stylist in the Low Country was a source of immense pride for him, but also a quiet, gnawing pressure. Theirs had to be the perfect power couple, an unimpeachable black family unit that defied every stereotype he'd fought against his entire life. "The foreman from the Ardsley Park project called again," Isaac said, leaning against the marble countertop. "Old man Hemmings is giving us trouble about the property line again. Thinks because I'm black, I don't know how to read a survey map." He ran a hand over his tired face. It was the same subtle, corrosive racism he'd dealt with for years, the assumption of incompetence, the endless second-guessing. Blair turned, her smile a balm on his frayed nerves. "You'll handle it, Ike. You always do." She walked over and wrapped her arms around his waist, resting her head on his chest. "You're the strongest man I know." In these moments, all the pressure dissolved. In her arms, he wasn't a symbol, he was just a man, loved. But the world outside their perfect home was turning dark. The sky, a placid blue an hour ago, was now a bruised, churning purple. The wind began to howl, rattling the century-old window panes. Tropical storm. Delilah was bearing down on the coast, and Savannah was directly in its path. "Sounds like she's here," Blair murmured, her voice a little tight. She hated storms. For the next few hours, they were a seamless team. They brought in the porch furniture, checked the storm shutters, and lit candles as the power inevitably flickered and died. The rain came down in solid, blinding sheets, a furious assault against their home. The roar was deafening. Isaac held Blair close on the sofa as they listened to the storm rage, the house groaning around them like a ship in a tempest. It was a violent, elemental chaos battering the walls of their carefully constructed order. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean and utterly broken. Tree limbs littered the streets and a shimmering layer of water covered their prized garden. A quick inspection revealed the damage. A few loose shutters, a toppled fence post, and a significant water stain spreading across the ceiling of the guest bedroom. "Damn it!" Isaac muttered, tracing the wet patch with his finger. "It's coming from the attic. A shingle must have come loose." He pulled down the attic stairs, the old wood creaking in protest. The air that hit him was musty and damp, the smell of old paper and trapped heat. The attic was their shared history's graveyard. Boxes of Christmas ornaments, his old college textbooks, Blair's out-of-season designer clothes destined for charity. A single window, streaked with rain, let in a weak gray light. In the far corner, directly under the leaking section of the roof, sat an old wooden wardrobe they used for storage. Water was dripping steadily from the ceiling onto its top, pooling and threatening to seep inside. "I've got to move this thing," Isaac grunted, grabbing the sides of the heavy piece of furniture. He braced his feet and pulled. It scraped reluctantly across the floorboards. He managed to move it a few feet out from under the drip, his muscles straining. As he straightened up, wiping sweat from his brow, his eyes caught something. In the space where the wardrobe had stood for the 4 years they had lived there, the floorboards looked different. One section seemed newer, the wood a slightly different shade, and set into it, almost perfectly flush, was a small tarnished brass ring. It wasn't a knot in the wood. It was a handle. His heart gave a strange, sharp thump. He knelt, his fingers tracing the outline of a hidden compartment he never knew existed. Prying it open with his pocket knife, he revealed a dark, hollow space beneath the floor. Nestled inside, wrapped in oilcloth to protect it from the damp, was a small, heavy metal chest. It was old, dented, and secured with a sturdy, unfamiliar lock. A secret hidden in the bones of his perfect house, placed there by the one person he thought he knew completely. The metal chest was cold and heavy in Isaac's hands, an alien object in the familiar landscape of his life. It felt like a betrayal. For 4 years, they had built a life in this house, a life he believed was founded on total transparency, a necessary bulwark against a world that was always looking for cracks in their facade. Yet here was a secret, locked away and hidden beneath the floorboards, a part of Blair he had no knowledge of. A flicker of irritation turned into a hot spark of anger. Why the secrecy? What could possibly be in here that she couldn't share with him, her husband? He carried it downstairs to his workshop in the garage, the one place that was unequivocally his. The air smelled of sawdust and oil, a masculine, straightforward scent that was the complete opposite of the cloying mystery of the chest. He set it on his workbench. The lock was old but well made. There was no key. For a moment he considered waiting, confronting her, demanding she open it herself. But the anger and a sharp, insistent curiosity won out. He didn't want an explanation. He wanted the truth, raw and unfiltered. He picked up a heavy-duty bolt cutter. With a grunt of effort, he positioned the jaws around the shackle of the lock. The metal groaned in protest. Then with a loud, violent snap, the lock broke. The sound echoed in the quiet garage, feeling final and transgressive. He lifted the lid. The contents were not what he expected. There were no old love letters from a past flame, no sentimental keepsakes from a life before him. Instead, the chest was packed with the mundane artifacts of a childhood that wasn't Blair's, or at least not the one she'd ever described. There were several dusty photo albums, a stack of school report cards, and a handful of academic awards, all bearing the same name, Brian Williams. He picked up the first album. The cover was worn, the corners soft with age. He opened it. A photo from the early 2000s showed a small, dark-skinned boy with a wide, gap-toothed grin, posing awkwardly in a Little League uniform. He had bright, lively eyes that seemed to dance with mischief. Isaac frowned. Blair had told him she was an only child, that her parents had passed away when she was young, leaving her with no other family. Who was this boy, Brian, a cousin she'd forgotten to mention? He kept turning the pages. The boy grew older. There he was at a science fair, proudly standing next to a volcano made of papier-mâché. There he was in a school band photo, holding a trumpet, his expression a mixture of boredom and pride. In every picture, those same lively eyes stared back at him. A strange, unsettling feeling of familiarity began to creep up Isaac's spine. He'd seen those eyes before. He saw them every single day. He flipped to the last album. The photos were more recent, from the late 2000s. Brian was a teenager now, lanky and a bit awkward, his smile more hesitant. One picture made Isaac's breath catch in his throat. It was a family portrait. The boy, around 16, stood next to an older woman who must have been his mother. The resemblance was clear, but it was the boy's face that held Isaac captive. The high cheekbones, the elegant curve of his eyebrows, the specific shape of his smile, even with the teenage uncertainty. It was all there. Shaking, Isaac pulled his phone from his pocket. His hands felt clumsy, disconnected from his body. He scrolled through his photos until he found a selfie they'd taken just last week at a charity gala. Blair was stunning in a dark blue gown, her head tilted, laughing at something he'd said. He held the phone screen next to the faded photograph of the teenage boy. The world tilted on its axis. It wasn't just a resemblance. It wasn't a long-lost brother. It was her. The same eyes, the same bone structure, the same soul staring out from two vastly different faces. The boy in the picture was Blair. Brian was Blair. A wave of nausea washed over him, so powerful he had to grip the workbench to keep from falling. It couldn't be. It was impossible. His beautiful, graceful, quintessentially feminine wife had been born a boy? The thought was a physical blow, knocking the wind out of him. His mind reeled, desperately trying to reject the evidence in front of him. This had to be some kind of sick joke, a misunderstanding. He dug deeper into the chest, his hands now frantic. He tossed aside the photo albums, searching for something, anything, that would disprove the monstrous idea taking root in his mind. At the bottom, beneath a high school diploma for Brian Williams from a school in Chicago, he found it, a thick manila folder. His fingers trembled as he opened it. The documents inside were not a joke. They were cold, hard, clinical facts. Medical records from a clinic in New York City, paperwork for hormone replacement therapy, surgical referrals with dates that lined up perfectly with the period Blair claimed she was finding herself after cosmetology school, receipts for procedures with terrifying alien names. It was a blueprint for a transformation, a detailed medicalized chronicle of how a boy named Brian had been systematically erased and a woman named Blair had been constructed in his place. The final damning piece of evidence was a small laminated card, a state ID issued a year before he met her. The name was Blair Turner. The gender marker read F, but the photo was of a face still in transition, a haunting chimera of the boy he'd just seen and the woman he thought he knew. The garage, once Isaac's sanctuary of order and control, suddenly felt like a cage. The scent of sawdust and oil was gone, replaced by the sour stench of betrayal. He stumbled out of the workshop and into the main house, the medical records clutched in his hand like a death sentence. His perfect house, his perfect wife, his perfect life. It was all a lie, a meticulously crafted 5-year-long deception. He wasn't a successful black man who had built a respectable family. He was a fool who had married a fraud. He went straight to the liquor cabinet, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. He grabbed a bottle of top-shelf whiskey, the kind they save for celebrations, and didn't bother with a glass. The first swallow burned a fiery path down his throat, a welcome pain that momentarily eclipsed the roaring in his head. He drank again and again, letting the alcohol scour him from the inside out. His mind flashed back through their years together, every memory now tainted, recontextualized into a piece of the grand lie. Blair's consistent, gentle refusal to talk about her childhood, which he'd always attributed to the trauma of losing her parents. It's just too painful, let's focus on our future. Her lack of any old photos in the house, explained away by a convenient fire at a storage unit years ago. The way she would tense up whenever the topic of children arose, her vague excuses about not being ready, about wanting to focus on their careers. He had thought it was ambition. Now he knew it was biology. He sank onto the expensive leather sofa, the whiskey bottle dangling from his hand. He thought of their intimacy, of the nights spent in their bed. Every touch, every kiss, every whispered declaration of love now felt like a violation. He had been sleeping with a man. The thought was so repulsive, so fundamentally jarring to his sense of self, his masculinity, that he felt a fresh wave of nausea. He had built his identity on being a certain kind of man, a provider, a protector, the head of a traditional family. He had married a woman to build that family with, and he had known. He had known what Isaac wanted, what he valued, and had played the part to perfection. The whiskey wasn't working fast enough. The rage was a living thing inside him, coiling in his gut. He grabbed his laptop, his fingers stabbing at the keyboard. Brian Williams, Chicago. He found the online archives of a Northwood high school. There, in the 2010 yearbook, was the face from the album. Brian Williams, debate club, marching band. The description read, quiet and studious, hopes to move to a big city and reinvent himself. The irony was a bitter pill. He fell down a rabbit hole of old internet forums. He found posts from a user named Blair W. dating back 8-9 years. They were cries from the wilderness, desperate and hopeful accounts of starting hormone therapy, of the loneliness of transition, of the fear of never being truly seen. One post, in particular, felt like a personal confession written directly to him. Sometimes I wonder if I can ever be fully honest with someone I love. There will always be this secret, this before. I'm so afraid the truth will destroy everything. Is it better to lie to protect a chance at happiness? She knew. She had always known. She had weighed the options and chosen deceit. She had chosen to build their entire world on a foundation of sand. He slammed the laptop shut. He finished the whiskey, the bottle hitting the floor with a dull thud. The anger wasn't just hot anymore. It had become a cold, hard stone in his chest. He felt used. He felt like a prop in her personal fantasy, the unsuspecting husband who validated her womanhood. The house was silent except for the frantic thumping of his own heart. The storm outside had passed, but the one inside Isaac was just reaching its peak intensity. He looked at the family photos on the mantel, their wedding, their vacations, their smiling faces. All of it was a sham, a stage play, and he had been the unwitting star. He was staring into the empty bottle on the floor when he heard the familiar sound of her car pulling into the driveway. A few moments later, the front door clicked open. "Ike, I'm home! I brought takeout from the Gray," Blair's cheerful voice called out from the foyer. The traffic was a nightmare with all the downed trees. She walked into the living room, a bright smile on her face, her arms full of brown paper bags. Her smile faltered, then vanished completely as she took in the scene. Isaac sitting in the dim light, his face a mask of thunder, the empty whiskey bottle on the floor, the chaotic mess of papers from the chest spread across the coffee table. Her eyes, those familiar lying eyes, widened in horror. She knew instantly. The secret was out. The silence in the room was a living entity, thick and suffocating. The cheerful aroma of takeout from the Gray, shrimp and grits, their favorite, was a grotesque counterpoint to the funereal atmosphere. Blair's hands trembled, and the paper bag slipped from her grasp, spilling containers onto the pristine hardwood floor. She didn't seem to notice. Her gaze was locked on the scattered contents of the chest on the coffee table. The ghost of her past life laid bare. "Isaac," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You were in the attic." It wasn't a question. Isaac didn't move. He just stared at her, his eyes cold and flat. He was looking at a stranger, a meticulously constructed illusion. He tried to reconcile the woman standing before him, the epitome of grace and femininity, with the lanky, awkward boy in the photographs. The effort made his head spin. "Who is Brian?" he asked. His voice was quiet, devoid of emotion, which was somehow more terrifying than if he had screamed. The color drained from Blair's face, leaving her honey-toned skin looking ashen. She sank onto the edge of an armchair as if her legs had given out. She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders beginning to shake with silent sobs. I wanted to tell you," she choked out from behind her fingers. "So many times. I was just so scared." "That scared?" Isaac finally moved, standing up. The quiet was gone, replaced by a low, dangerous tremor in his voice. "You were scared, so you decided it was better to lie? To build our entire marriage, 5 years, on a fundamental lie about who you are?" "It wasn't a lie." Blair looked up, her eyes swimming with tears, pleading with him. "The person you've been with, the person who loves you, that's the real me. That has always been the real me, Ike. I've always been a woman on the inside. I was just born in the wrong body." Isaac let out a short, sharp bark of a laugh that held no humor. It was a sound of pure contempt. "Wrong body? Don't give me that bullshit. I married a woman, Blair, a biological woman, a woman who could give me children, a real family, not this." He gestured vaguely at her, a look of profound disgust on his face. The word real was a physical blow to Blair. "I am real," she insisted, pain lacing her voice. "My love for you is real. Everything we've shared is real. Does my past change the fact that I've stood by you, that I've supported your dreams, that I love you more than anything?" "How could you not tell me?" he roared, the cold control finally shattering. He slammed his fist on the mantelpiece, rattling the picture frames. 5 years, Blair! We talked about names for our future kids. You let me talk about that, knowing you could never, knowing what you are. "I tried," she cried, getting to her feet. "At the beginning, I was afraid you'd leave me before you even got to know me. And then it just got harder. I know your values, Ike. I know your family. I know how you feel about people like me. I was terrified of seeing the exact look you're giving me right now." Her words were meant to be a plea for understanding, but they had the opposite effect. "So you knew," he said, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "You knew I would never have chosen this. You knew, and you trapped me anyway. You made me love you. You made me love a man." He spat the word like it was poison. "Don't," she begged, taking a step toward him. "Please don't do this." "Get out," Isaac said, turning his back on her. his entire body rigid with a rage that was threatening to consume him. "Just get your things and get out of my house." "Ike, please, let's just talk this through," she sobbed, reaching for his arm. "I'm still the same person you fell in love with. Nothing has changed." He whirled around, his face contorted. "Everything has changed," he yelled, his voice cracking. "I look at you, and I don't see my wife. I see him." He jabbed a finger toward the photograph of the teenage boy on the table. "I see Brian." The use of that name, the name she had fought so hard to bury, was the ultimate cruelty. A pained, guttural sound escaped Blair's lips. It was the sound of a spirit breaking. She was no longer just sad or scared. She was wounded to her very core. All the years of struggle, the surgeries, the therapy, the fight to be seen as herself, all of it was being erased by the one person whose acceptance she craved most. In a surge of desperate, agonizing pain, she did the one thing she never thought she would do. She drew her hand back and slapped him hard across the face. The sound was like a gunshot in the tense silence of the room. It wasn't a powerful blow, but it was definitive. It was the sound of a line being crossed, of a conversation ending and a battle beginning. The last vestiges of the love and tenderness that had defined their home evaporated in that single, sharp crack, leaving only rage and violence in its place. The red imprint of Blair's hand bloomed on Isaac's cheek. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to stop. The shock on both their faces was identical, a shared horror at what had just happened. But for Isaac, the physical sting was nothing compared to the symbolic insult. He had dared to strike him. It was the final, unforgivable act of defiance, the ultimate confirmation in his warped mind that he was dealing not with his wife, but with an aggressive male adversary. The cold, hard stone of anger in his chest exploded into molten lava. A primal roar tore from his throat, a sound of pure, unrestrained fury. He lunged at her. He wasn't thinking about consequences, about love, about the 5 years they had shared. He was operating on pure, visceral instinct, a blinding need to dominate, to put this thing back in its place. "You have no right," he bellowed, grabbing her by the shoulders. His grip was like iron. He shook her, her head snapping back and forth. The delicate, graceful woman he had admired was gone, replaced by a rag doll in his violent hands. "Isaac, stop! You're hurting me!" Blair cried out, her voice filled with terror. She struggled against him, trying to pry his fingers from her arms, but his rage gave him inhuman strength. The fear in her eyes only fueled his fire. It was the fear he felt she should have, the fear of a liar caught and cornered. "Hurt!" he snarled, his face inches from hers, spittle flying from his lips. "You want to know about hurt? Hurt is finding out your life is a lie. Hurt is being made a fool of by a freak." He shoved her away from him, a single violent thrust meant to send her stumbling back. But he misjudged his own strength, the angle, the proximity of the massive, ornate marble fireplace that was the centerpiece of their living room. Blair stumbled backward, her arms flailing, her eyes wide with panic. She had no time to regain her balance. Her heel caught on the edge of the thick Persian rug. She fell, not onto the soft carpet, but sideways, toward the fireplace. Time seemed to warp, stretching into an eternity and compressing into a nanosecond. Isaac watched, frozen, as the back of her head moved in a sickeningly inevitable arc toward the sharp, unforgiving corner of the marble mantelpiece. The sound was not loud. It was a dull, wet crack, a sound of bone meeting stone, dense and final. It was a sound that cut through the fog of his rage like a shard of ice. Blair crumpled to the floor without a sound, landing in a heap at the base of the fireplace. She lay unnervingly still. "Blair?" Isaac whispered, the anger vanishing as quickly as it had come, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. "Blair?" He took a hesitant step forward. A dark crimson line began to snake its way from beneath her head, staining the pristine white marble and seeping into the cream-colored fibers of the rug. It was a shockingly vivid slash of red against the pale perfection of their living room. He stared at it, mesmerized, his mind refusing to process what he was seeing. He fell to his knees beside her. "No, no, no," he chanted, his voice a frantic whisper. He gently rolled her over. Her eyes were open, but they were vacant, staring up at the ceiling with a glassy, unfocused gaze. The life, the intelligence, the love he knew was gone. There was nothing there. "Blair, baby, wake up," he pleaded, shaking her shoulder gently. "Come on, this isn't funny." Those but her head just lolled to the side. A dark pool of blood was rapidly growing around her. Panic, cold and absolute, seized him. He had killed her. In a fit of rage, he had murdered his wife. His mind was a maelstrom of denial and terror. This wasn't happening. It was a nightmare. Then, through the haze of his panic, a new sound penetrated the horrifying silence. The distinct, familiar sound of a car engine idling just outside their front gate, followed by the soft crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. A car door opened and closed. Footsteps. Coming up the front porch steps. Knock, knock, knock. A cheerful, reedy voice called through the door. "Isaac, Blair dear, it's just me, Mrs. Gable from next door. I baked some cookies and just wanted to pop over and make sure y'all were all right after that wicked storm." Isaac froze, crouched over Blair's lifeless body, his hands stained with her blood. The smell of death was already beginning to mingle with the smell of magnolias. Outside the door was the mundane, normal world. Inside was a scene from a slaughterhouse. He had seconds. Seconds to hide a murder from the prying eyes of his sweet elderly neighbor. A jolt of pure animal adrenaline shot through Isaac. The panic didn't recede. It sharpened, focusing into a single, desperate objective: concealment. He couldn't let Mrs. Gable see this. He couldn't let anyone see this. With a surge of strength he didn't know he possessed, he scooped Blair's body into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, a dead weight. Her head lolled against his shoulder, leaving a warm, wet smear of blood on his shirt. He half ran, half stumbled out of the living room and down the short hallway to the large walk-in coat closet under the stairs. He laid her inside, amongst their expensive winter coats and Blair's collection of designer boots, pushing her behind a row of hanging garments. He shut the door, plunging her into darkness. Knock, 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 this time more insistent. "Yoo-hoo! Anybody home?" Isaac's heart hammered against his ribs. He looked down at himself. Blood on his shirt. Blood on his hands. He ripped the shirt off, tossing it into the closet with her body, and ran to the kitchen sink, scrubbing his hands raw under cold water. He splashed water on his face, trying to compose his features into something resembling normalcy. He grabbed a clean dish towel to wipe his hands and took a deep, shuddering breath. He walked to the front door, his bare chest heaving, and forced a smile. He opened it just a crack. "Mrs. Gable, hey, sorry, we were just cleaning up a bit." The small, bird-like woman peered at him, a plate of cookies covered in plastic wrap held in her wrinkled hands. "Oh, Isaac dear, I was so worried. That storm was a real monster. Is everything all right? Is Blair okay?" She usually answers the door. "She's fine, just exhausted. Has a terrible headache from the storm. She's lying down." He lied, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. His mind was screaming. "There's a body in the closet. There's blood on the floor. Oh, the poor dear. Well, I won't keep you. Just wanted to drop these off." She passed the plate through the crack in the door. "You two take care now." "We will. Thanks, Mrs. Gable." He closed the door, leaning his forehead against the cool wood, his body trembling uncontrollably. The plate of cookies clattered to the floor. He had done it. He had survived the first test. But the relief was fleeting, immediately replaced by the horrifying reality of the situation. A body. In his house. What now? Call the police? Confess? The image of himself, a big black man, trying to explain how his wife accidentally died during a fight, flashed in his mind. They would never believe him. Never. Especially not when they found out the nature of their argument. The media would have a field day. Man kills transgender wife after discovering her secret. His name, his business, everything he had built would be destroyed. He would be a monster, a cliché. No, he couldn't let that happen. He had to erase this. He had to erase her. A cold, terrifying clarity descended upon him. He had a new project, not building a house, but deconstructing a crime. The next few hours were a blur of frenzied, methodical activity. He was no longer a grieving, panicked husband. He was a contractor with a problem to solve. First, the living room. He stripped off his bloody jeans and worked in his underwear. He found a bottle of industrial-strength bleach under the sink. He poured it directly onto the blood stain on the rug, the chemical smell burning his nostrils. He scrubbed until his knuckles were raw, the crimson fading to a faint, brownish pink. He did the same to the marble hearth. He gathered the broken pieces of the spilled takeout containers and threw them away. Next, the body. This was the hardest part. He opened the closet door. The smell was already changing. He averted his eyes, treating her not as his wife, but as material, debris to be disposed of. He went to the garage and returned with a roll of thick black contractor bags and a roll of duct tape. With a clinical detachment that scared him, he wrapped Blair's body in the bags, layer after layer, taping every seam until it was a featureless black cocoon. He had to create a story. Blair left him. He packed one of her overnight bags with a few of her things, clothes, toiletries, leaving her phone and wallet behind to make it look like she'd left in a hurry, too angry to think straight. The house was clean. The story was set. Now, for the final gruesome step. He waited until well after midnight, until the street was dark and silent. He backed his F-150 pickup truck up to the garage. He struggled to lift the heavy, awkward bundle into the truck bed, covering it with an old tarp. He drove out of his pristine neighborhood, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly they ached. He headed west, away from the city, toward the vast, dark expanse of the Savannah National Wildlife Refuge. The roads were deserted. He found a remote, unpaved service road that led deep into the marshlands. The air was thick with the smell of mud and decay, the night alive with the chirping of insects. He pulled over, killed the engine, and listened. Nothing but the sounds of the swamp. He got out and wrestled the bundle from the truck bed, dragging it toward the dark, brackish water. He was sweating, his heart pounding. He just needed to get it into the water, let the gators and the mud do the rest. As he was heaving the body over a small embankment, a pair of brilliant white lights pierced the darkness, pinning him in their glare. He froze, his blood turning to ice. The lights were getting closer. It was a vehicle coming down the same remote service road. He squinted, his heart seizing in his chest, as the distinct shape of a light bar on the roof became visible. It was a sheriff's patrol car, doing a routine sweep of the refuge after the storm. The spotlight swept across the landscape and then locked directly onto him, a man standing over a large, black, body-shaped bundle on the edge of the swamp in the dead of night. For an eternal second, Isaac was a statue, caught in the blinding white glare of the spotlight. His mind went completely blank. This was it. It was over. The patrol car slowed, its engine a low rumble in the oppressive quiet of the swamp. Isaac braced for the inevitable siren, the shouted commands, the end of his life as he knew it. But then, the unthinkable happened. The spotlight swung away, sweeping further down the road before extinguishing. The patrol car continued at its slow pace, passed his position without a second glance, and disappeared around a bend. The officer hadn't seen him, or, if he had, he'd dismissed him as a local dumping trash, not worth the paperwork on a miserable post-storm night. Isaac collapsed to his knees, gasping for air he didn't realize he'd been holding. He was shaking so violently he could barely stand. He didn't waste another second. With a final desperate heave, he rolled the black bundle into the murky water. It landed with a heavy splash, then sank quickly, consumed by the dark, primordial soup of the marsh. He scrambled back to his truck, turned it around, and sped away, not looking back. The next morning, the call came into the Chatham County Police Department. A local fisherman, poling his skiff through the backwaters of the wildlife refuge, had found something snagged on a submerged log. It wasn't a gator. It was a body. Detective Leonard Bishop stood on the muddy bank, the humidity already oppressive at 7 a.m. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man in his late 40s, his face a stoic mask that concealed a razor-sharp mind. He'd transferred to Savannah 6 months ago after 15 years in Baltimore homicide, hoping for a quieter life. He was quickly learning that evil didn't care about the size of the town. "What have we got, Naomi?" he asked, his voice a low baritone. Dr. Naomi Wells, the county's chief medical examiner, looked up from the body, which was now on a tarp on the bank. She was a sharp, no-nonsense woman, and one of the few people in the department Bishop considered a peer. Female, African-American, early 30s. Ligature marks on the neck suggest strangulation as primary COD, but there's also significant blunt force trauma to the back of the head. She wasn't killed here, Leonard. Body was dumped. Lividity patterns are all wrong. Time of death, I'd estimate sometime last night, between 7 and 10 p.m. Bishop knelt, studying the victim. Even in death, marred by the swamp and the violence, her beauty was evident. She was dressed in an expensive silk blouse and trousers, now ruined. A large diamond ring glittered on her left hand. Not a robbery, then, he mused. Who are you? As if on cue, a uniformed officer approached, leading a man who looked like he'd been awake for days. Detective? This man, Tyler Morris, he's been calling all morning about a missing friend. He saw the news report and came down. Tyler's eyes fell on the body, and a strangled sob escaped his lips. Oh, God. Blair. It's Blair. At the mention of the name, Bishop saw Dr. Wells flinch, her professional composure cracking for just a fraction of a second. She quickly regained it, but Bishop filed the reaction away. Blair Turner, Tyler choked out, his face ashen. She's my best friend. We were supposed to meet last night. She never showed. She wasn't answering her phone. I knew something was wrong. I need to notify her husband, Bishop said, turning to Tyler. Isaac Turner. Do you know where he lives? Yes, I'll take you, Tyler said, his voice raw. Oh God, Isaac, this is going to destroy him. As they drove to the Immaculate Victorian on Jones Street, Bishop felt the pieces of the puzzle starting to shift in his mind. The victim was well off, married, seemingly loved. This wasn't a random act of violence. This was personal. When they arrived at the Turner house, Bishop's finely honed instincts went on high alert. The house was perfect, the garden pristine, a picture of domestic tranquility. But as Isaac Turner opened the door, a tall, handsome man with red-rimmed eyes that spoke of either grief or a sleepless night, Bishop was hit by a smell. It wasn't the expected scent of coffee or morning bacon. It was the sharp, unmistakable, overpowering odor of bleach and industrial cleaning products. It was the smell of erasure. Isaac played the part of the shocked, grieving husband. He listened to Bishop's gentle but direct words, then collapsed onto the sofa, his face in his hands, his body racked with sobs. Tyler rushed to his side, a loyal friend offering comfort. It was a perfect picture of tragedy. We had a fight, Isaac mumbled through his tears. A stupid fight. She said she needed space, that she was leaving. I let her go. I thought she went to your place, Tyler. She never came, Ike, Tyler said softly. Bishop watched the performance, his expression sympathetic, but his mind cold and analytical. The grief seemed real, but the smell of bleach told a different story. Mr. Turner, Bishop said, his voice gentle, I know this is incredibly difficult, but I need your permission to have a look around the house. Standard procedure. She may have left a note, anything that could help. Isaac hesitated for a split second too long, a flicker of panic in his eyes before he masked it. Of course, detective. Anything to find the monster who did this. Bishop walked through the house, his eyes missing nothing. The perfect order was itself a red flag. It felt staged. In the living room, he noted the faint discoloration on the cream-colored rug near the fireplace, almost invisible to the naked eye. He saw the empty spot on the mantel where a picture frame should have been. But there was nothing concrete. The killer had been thorough. Bishop knew he would need a search warrant and more than just his own two eyes. He needed a partner whose senses couldn't be fooled by bleach and a good story. Isaac Turner's performance was masterful. He wept. He raged against the unknown killer. He shared fond memories of Blair, painting a portrait of a blissful marriage shattered by a random act of horrific violence. His story was simple and hard to disprove. They'd had a terrible fight about his family's disapproval of Blair's modern lifestyle. She'd packed a bag and stormed out, and he'd spent the night drinking himself into a stupor, heartbroken and alone. He provided a list of potential enemies, a disgruntled former employee at Blair's salon, a rival business owner, all plausible, all leading away from him. Tyler Morris corroborated parts of the story, confirming that Isaac's family had always been cold toward Blair. But Bishop noticed Tyler's careful phrasing, the way his eyes would dart away when asked about the specifics of the fight. He was protecting someone, but was it his dead friend's memory or her husband? Back at the precinct, Bishop laid out what he had. It feels wrong, he said to Dr. Wells, who had come by to drop off her preliminary report. The house is too clean, the story is too neat. I have a gut feeling, but gut feelings don't hold up in court. You need more than a smell of bleach, Naomi agreed, her expression unreadable. She knew more than she was letting on, and it was eating at her. Bishop could see it. I'm getting a warrant, Bishop said, making a decision. And I'm not going back there alone. Call in the K9 unit. I want Officer Evans and his bloodhound. A few hours later, Detective Bishop stood once more on the threshold of the Turner home, this time with a search warrant in his hand and a team of forensic technicians behind him. At the end of a leash held by Officer Evans was Shadow, a large, magnificent bloodhound with droopy eyes and ears that hung like velvet curtains. Shadow was a legend in the department, a dog whose nose had solved more cases than some detectives. Isaac's composure cracked slightly at the sight of the dog. Is that really necessary? He asked, a note of panic in his voice. We cover all our bases, Mr. Turner, Bishop said coolly. The dog can detect things we can't, like a trail she may have left, or if someone else was in the house. The forensics team began their methodical work, dusting for prints and taking samples. Bishop directed Officer Evans and Shadow to the living room. Start here, he said. See what he finds. Evans gave the command, and Shadow went to work. The dog's nose dropped to the floor, and it began to move in a slow, zigzag pattern, its tail held low, its whole body a single focused sensory organ. The overpowering scent of bleach was a problem. Shadow sneezed several times, shaking his massive head as if to clear it. He circled the room, seeming confused, picking up faint trails of Blair's perfume, Isaac's cologne, the takeout food from the night before, a cacophony of scents that led nowhere. Isaac watched, a sheen of sweat on his forehead, his mask of grief slipping. He was starting to look like what he was, a cornered man. Shadow made a second pass of the room. He sniffed at the sofa, the chairs, the curtains. He seemed ready to give up. Evans was about to call him off, to declare the room too contaminated. Bishop felt a pang of disappointment. Maybe his gut was wrong this time. But then Shadow stopped. He froze mid-stride, his body rigid, his nose pointed directly at the floor near the large marble fireplace. It was the exact spot where Bishop had noticed the faint discoloration on the rug, a spot Isaac had clearly scrubbed with all his might. To the human eye, it was perfect. Clean. Shadow lowered his head until his nose was pressed deep into the fibers of the thick Persian rug. A low whine started deep in his chest. Then he raised his head and let out a single, deep, resonant bark, his alert signal. He began to paw at the spot, scratching insistently, looking back at his handler with an unwavering certainty in his sad brown eyes. He had found it. The scent of death, however faint, however masked by chemicals, could not be hidden from him. Well, I'll be damned, Officer Evans muttered. Bishop's heart began to beat faster. He locked eyes with Isaac Turner from across the room. He saw no grief in the man's eyes now, only pure, unadulterated fear. The perfect facade had just been torn open by a dog's nose. Shadow's insistent alert transformed the investigation. The forensic team swarmed the area around the fireplace. They carefully pulled back the heavy Persian rug. On the padding underneath, a large, faint stain was visible, one that had soaked deep into the fibers where Isaac's surface-level scrubbing couldn't reach. A technician sprayed the area with luminol and turned off the lights. The room was plunged into darkness, and then a ghostly, ethereal blue glow erupted from the floor pad, a chemical ghost of the blood that had been spilled there. "We have a positive," the technician said, his voice echoing in the dark room. Isaac, who was required to stay during the search, let out a small, strangled sound. The discoveries came quickly after that. In the outdoor trash can, buried beneath the week's garbage, they found the shattered remains of a heavy crystal vase. Tucked inside a plastic bag with coffee grounds, someone had tried to hide it. A closer look revealed dark, reddish-brown flakes on the jagged edges. In the garage, another technician using a high-intensity light found microscopic blood spatter on the concrete floor near the workbenches, consistent with cast off from a weapon or a bloody object. The cleanup had been good, but not perfect. Isaac had made mistakes. With the physical evidence mounting, Bishop knew it was time to apply pressure to the human element. He sent the forensics team on their way and left Isaac stewing in the ruins of his living room with a uniformed officer. He drove back to the ME's office, where he found Naomi Wells staring out her window, looking troubled. "Your victim had defensive wounds on her hands and forearms, Naomi," Bishop began, forgoing any pleasantries. She fought back, and the blow to her head was consistent with striking a sharp corner, like a fireplace mantel. Naomi didn't look at him. "It's in my preliminary report. I also know you flinched when you saw Tyler Morris. You two know each other, and you both knew the victim better than you're letting on. In a homicide investigation, withholding information makes you an accessory. Talk to me, Naomi. What secret was Blair Turner keeping that was worth dying for?" Naomi finally turned, her eyes filled with a mixture of grief and guilt. She took a deep breath. "Blair was a transgender woman," she said quietly. "I knew her from New York. I helped her with some things when she first moved here. She was terrified of anyone finding out, especially Isaac. He's traditional, conservative." The puzzle pieces clicked into place with dizzying speed. The fight, the rage, the motive. "Did Isaac know?" Bishop asked. "I don't think so," she whispered, "but Tyler would know if he found out. They were inseparable. Blair told him everything." Bishop's next stop was Tyler Morris's apartment. He found Tyler pacing, his face a mess of anxiety. Bishop didn't waste time. He sat Tyler down at his small kitchen table. "I know Blair was transgender, Tyler, and I know you knew, and I have a strong suspicion that Isaac found out right before she was killed." Tyler flinched as if he'd been struck. I didn't want her dignity," he stammered. "Her dignity is gone, son. She's dead," Bishop said, his voice firm but not unkind. "Her killer is trying to get away with it. Helping me is the only way to get her justice now. What happened that night?" Tears welled in Tyler's eyes. "She came to my place 2 nights ago," he confessed, his voice breaking. "She was hysterical. She said Isaac had been in the attic, that he'd found her old things, photos, documents from before. He was furious. He called her a liar, a freak. I begged her not to go back. I told her to stay with me, that we'd figure it out. But she loved him so much." He buried his face in his hands. "Yesterday, she said she had to try. She was going to go back and talk to him, to try to make him understand. She said their love was stronger than his prejudice. That was the last time I ever spoke to her." The story was now complete. The motive, the means, the opportunity. It all pointed to one person. Bishop stood up, his face grim. He had one last card to play, one final piece of evidence to leverage. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small, framed photograph the forensics team had found wedged deep between the sofa cushions at the Turner house. It must have fallen during the struggle. He placed it on the table in front of the sobbing man. It was the photo of a smiling 13-year-old boy, with the inscription on the back, "Our son, Brian." Bishop looked Tyler straight in the eye and asked a single quiet question. "Mr. Morris, can you tell me who this is?" The sight of the picture of the innocent boy his friend used to be broke the last of Tyler's composure. His carefully constructed wall of protection crumbled into dust. The interrogation room was small, gray, and smelled of stale coffee and desperation. Isaac Turner sat at the metal table, his hands cuffed in front of him. His expensive clothes were wrinkled, his face was pale, and the air of confident authority he usually wore had completely evaporated. He looked like a man hollowed out from the inside. Detective Bishop entered and sat down opposite him, placing a thin file on the table between them. He didn't open it. He just sat there, his large hands resting on the table, his gaze steady and unwavering. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Isaac shifted uncomfortably, refusing to meet the detective's eyes. Finally, Bishop spoke, his voice calm and measured, more like a narrator telling a story than a cop conducting an interrogation. "It was the storm," he began. "The storm led you to the attic. It led you to a secret you were never meant to find, a chest hidden under the floorboards. Inside, you found Brian." Isaac flinched at the name. His eyes remained fixed on the scarred surface of the table. "You didn't understand," Bishop continued, his voice maintaining its hypnotic, even rhythm. "So you looked deeper. You found the medical records, the truth, and it broke you. It shattered the perfect image you had of your life, your wife, yourself. So you started drinking, and you waited." Bishop paused, letting the words sink in. She came home, happy, oblivious, and you confronted her. You called her a liar. You called her a man. You used the one name you knew would hurt her most, Brian. You wanted to wound her, to punish her for deceiving you. And when she finally fought back, when she slapped you, you lost control. Isaac's breathing became ragged. A muscle twitched in his jaw. "You grabbed her," Bishop said, his voice dropping slightly, becoming more intense. "You shook her. You were stronger. You shoved her. Maybe you meant to just push her away. Maybe not. But she fell. Her head hit the corner of the marble fireplace. We found the evidence of the impact, Isaac. We found the blood, deep in the carpet fibers, where the bleach couldn't reach. Shadow found it." At the mention of the dog, Isaac's head shot up. His eyes, for the first time, met Bishop's. They were filled with a wild, cornered look. "Then Mrs. Gable knocked on your door," Bishop said, pressing on, giving him no room to breathe. "And you hid the body. You lied to an old woman, and after she left, you went to work. The cleanup was impressive, very thorough. The contractor bags, the duct tape. You treated your wife's body like it was construction debris. You drove her to the swamp and you threw her away." Bishop leaned forward, his gaze pinning Isaac in place. "You almost got caught. A patrol car passed you. Bet your heart stopped right then. But you got lucky. You dumped her body, and you drove home. Back to your perfect house, ready to play the part of the grieving husband. The only thing you forgot was the photograph, the picture of the boy. You tried to hide it in the couch, but we found it, Isaac, just like we found everything else." Bishop stopped talking. The story was told. The silence that followed was absolute. Isaac stared at the detective, his face a crumbling mask of defiance. Then his shoulders began to shake. A low, guttural sob escaped his lips. It wasn't the sound of remorse. It was the sound of self-pity. He dropped his head into his cuffed hands. "She made me do it," he choked out, the words muffled. "She lied to me. For 5 years." He looked up, tears streaming down his face, his expression contorted with rage and victimhood. "Do you have any idea what that's like? To build a life with someone, to love them, to plan a future, only to find out it's all fake? She turned my life into a joke. I'm a respected man in this community. A black man who did everything right, who built a business from nothing, who tried to have a good, decent, normal family, and she ruined it. She brought this filth into my home." His voice rose to a hysterical pitch. "She humiliated me. She made me love a man. She was a freak, an abomination. She got what she deserved." The confession, when it came, was not a whisper of guilt. It was a roar of justification. In that moment, Detective Bishop didn't see a man who had made a tragic mistake in a fit of passion. He saw a man consumed by a hatred so profound that it had completely eclipsed his humanity. He saw a man who believed, to his very core, that his wife's identity was a crime punishable by death, and that he was not the killer, but the executioner. Bishop stood up slowly, his face grim. The performance was over. He looked at the broken, hateful man sobbing at the table and felt nothing but a vast, weary sadness. He had his confession. Justice, in its cold, legal sense, would be served. The trial of Isaac Turner was a media sensation in Savannah, a grim spectacle that ripped the veil off the city's polite, magnolia-scented society. The courtroom was packed every day with a morbidly curious public. The story had everything: a successful, handsome couple, a shocking secret, and a brutal murder in a historic mansion. The prosecution, armed with Isaac's vitriolic confession and the mountain of forensic evidence, laid out the case with cold precision. Isaac's defense team tried to paint him as a victim, a man driven temporarily insane by a catastrophic betrayal. They argued for manslaughter, a crime of passion. But Isaac's own words, recorded in the interrogation room, were his undoing. The jury heard his hate-filled tirade, his utter lack of remorse, his belief that Blair's identity was an attack on his own. They saw not a man who had lost control, but a man who had appointed himself judge, jury, and executioner. The verdict was swift and unanimous: guilty of murder in the first degree. Isaac Turner, the man who had built an empire to shield himself from prejudice, was sentenced to life in prison, his own life now defined by the very bigotry he claimed to fight against. In the weeks that followed, a fragile peace settled over the city. Tyler Morris and Naomi Wells found themselves bound by a shared, unspoken grief. They organized Blair's funeral, a small, private affair attended by a handful of loyal clients and friends. They chose a beautiful, simple headstone that read, Blair Turner, a beloved friend, a fearless woman. There was no mention of Brian. They gave her in death the uncomplicated identity she had fought so hard for in life. But both carried a heavy burden of guilt, a lifetime of what-ifs. What if they had intervened more forcefully? What if they had convinced her not to go back? One evening, months after the trial, Detective Leonard Bishop sat alone in his quiet office, the city lights twinkling outside his window. The case file for Blair Turner lay on his desk, officially closed. But it wasn't closed in his mind. He picked up the evidence photo of the smiling, 13-year-old boy named Brian. He looked into the child's bright, hopeful eyes and felt a profound sense of tragedy. This was never just a story about a man who killed his wife. It was a story about the terrifying power of secrets and the devastating violence of prejudice. Isaac Turner was a product of a world that had taught him that his worth as a black man was tied to a rigid, traditional form of masculinity. He saw Blair's truth not as a part of her journey, but as a direct assault on his own fragile identity. His fear of being seen as less than, the same fear that had driven him to succeed, was the very thing that had turned him into a monster. He had spent his life fighting one kind of prejudice, only to become a vessel for another. Blair, in her quest for love and acceptance, had made a fatal miscalculation. She had believed that the love she and Isaac shared was a transcendent force, powerful enough to overcome the deep-seated fears and biases of the world. She couldn't imagine that the man who cherished her as a woman could simultaneously loathe the truth of her existence. Bishop leaned back in his chair, the weight of the case settling heavily on his shoulders. The real lesson here was a hard and simple one. Fear is a more powerful motivator than love for some. Prejudice, when it is woven into the very fabric of one's identity, can curdle a person's soul. The story of Isaac and Blair was a testament to the fact that the most dangerous lies are not the ones we tell others, but the ones we tell ourselves about who we are, who we should be, and who we have the right to love. True acceptance requires a courage that Isaac Turner never possessed. And Blair Turner, a woman who had been courageous her entire life, paid the ultimate price for his cowardice. The truth had not set her free. It had gotten her killed. And that was the most unjust verdict of all.